on that. And I'll just kind of put in the chat when we get down to the last couple minutes, if that's okay.
That's perfect. Okay, awesome. Welcome, everyone. So I'm here to talk about kind of two tools actually embedded into this one presentation. So first, a little bit about the reading tiered fidelity inventory tool as a fidelity instrument or set of fidelity instruments, and then the complementary reporting system that is a national free access tool that goes with the assessment itself. Before we get into the details of the RTFI, I just want to share a little bit about myself with all of you. So that's a picture of my family on New Year's Eve. We celebrated, I think that was at like 6:30 p.m. on New Year's Eve. So it's my husband, Tim, and my son, Lucas, is 10. My daughter, Sophie, is 4. But very excited to be 5 and going to kindergarten next year. So I've worked with the MyMTSS TA Center for close to 15 years now, and my role is evaluation and research administrator. So I do a lot of internal kind of program evaluation work, grant reporting, thinking about setting up our own internal systems for database decision making, and so a lot of that work has me really far from teachers and really far from kids, which is not necessarily why I decided to get into education, but it is my reality and I love the work that I'm doing. But so often kind of my closest experience and connection to education is through my kids right now with my preschool age daughter and my 4th grade son. For most of my adult life, I've been a Michigander. So I live over there by the #1 dot in Grand Haven, Michigan, on the west side of the state. It's a beautiful area. If you've never been here in Grand Haven, we've got like beachfront. It's beautiful in the summertime. I spent 4 years down in Kalamazoo at #2, getting my first degree from Kalamazoo College. And then I went back to grad school at Michigan State University and got my degree in school psychology. And it was in the last 2 years of my program there that I really got connected to the TA Center, which was called my Blissy at the time, and read like a research article written by some of the staff at the TA Center. I was like, oh my gosh, this amazing work is happening right in this state, and I just have to be connected to it. And so was able to do that work and be right here where I grew up and connected to that. So in the SPDIG community, I feel most connected to the evaluators network. I feel like the evaluators for SPDIG are really a strong kind of community. And so through that, I've had a bunch of evaluation experience with 4 SPDIGs now that we've had in Michigan, but also bring some experience around some school climate transformation grant, SEA evaluation, and some OSEP model demonstration grants. So just a little bit about me. But one of the things that I just have loved since being part of the SPDIG community, really since 2007, is kind of this identity that really revolves around a lot around measuring implementation. Like I feel like that is very much a core value within the SPDIG community. And like you see it come out all over the place in Program Measures 1 and Program Measures 2. I love that there's Fidelity Fridays. I wasn't able to attend the first one. I don't know if any of you were, but I think that is just an amazing part of this community, recognizing even what Jennifer shared this morning with the active implementation framework formula, right? Recognizing the effective implementation is really a critical ingredient to getting the socially oh gosh, I start saying something and then I like drop off the bed. Socially significant student outcomes. There we go. Oops, the wrong way there. So we're going to talk a little bit about the RTFI, and we don't have a huge group here, but I am curious if you want to put into the chat or even just unmute. I'm curious, like maybe you're here because your SPDIG includes some professional learning connected to the reading components of an MTSS framework. Can I do a shout out if that's you? Are there literacy components of your SPDIG? Rondalyn, yes, thumbs up there. Very good. So if you do have, or you're considering embedding into future SPIDIG, something that touches on the reading components of an MTSS framework, we need to have something to measure the implementation of that in school settings. And so we think that the RTFI could be a great tool to assist you with that. But that's not where we started in Michigan with what we have now. We actually started, so when I got connected to the TA Center, it was 2007, this picture of my husband and I at our wedding, because it was like a good year for me, 2007. I started my advanced practicum with the TA Center, and I got married that year. But back then we were doing things a little bit differently in Michigan. So our fidelity measure to look at the reading components of an MTSS framework was the planning and evaluation tool revised. I'm not sure if you all have any experience with that or remember it. It was a tool that was came out with Reading First. Ed Kaminui and Deb Simmons were the lead authors on that. And but there was really an elementary focus only with that tool, and like an early elementary focus. The focus was also tier 1. Any evaluators thinking back to these days, or maybe you're still there, that's okay. But people were sending us paper copies of their assessment results. So I remember getting the like manila envelopes in the mail with like the photocopied versions of their assessments. And then we would enter that into a spreadsheet that we had on a shared drive at one of our intermediate school districts where our TA Center staff worked. And when we started looking at that data, because So I think it was around somewhere between 2007 and 2010 when that first like implementation science handbook or manual was produced by NERN. You guys remember that? It's like you got a worn copy on your bookshelf somewhere. And like I loved it. And so built my whole dissertation around kind of looking at the connection between all this like historical data from the MyMTSS TA Center and this like systems level fidelity data at the school level and some aggregated student outcomes. And one of the things that we're seeing, and it was so perplexing and frustrating to us, where you would expect to see this like really great positive correlation as PET-R scores would increase, and you'd want to see that like our DIBBLE scores were also increasing at the same time. But what we often saw was actually an inverse relationship with the reading outcomes. So like we'd have really high PET scores and like really low reading scores. And so you're thinking like maybe you've seen some of this pattern happen before. You can think of some of the reasons why that could be. So between 2007 and 2022, like a lot of things happened. So if you want to know the details of all of that, we can chat some other time, but I'm just going to fast forward to where we got to in the spring of 2022. We actually released the Reading Tiered Fidelity 2.0. So this was the second version of the RTFI. And so now we're in a space where we have a fidelity assessment tool for the reading components of MTSS that hit on elementary level data systems and practices, as well as secondary level data systems and practices in different editions. Both editions address both tier 1 and advanced tiers, and which is also a change between 1.0 and 2.0. So you think about MTSS, most people think tier 1, tier 2, tier 3. When we looked at a bunch of the data that we got from the first rounds of data collection with RTFI 1.0, what we saw is that it was, with our factor analysis, it was really hard to discriminate the tier 2 items from tier 1 and tier 3. Those tier 2 items weren't really hanging together kind of by themselves as a cluster of items. And so we structured the tool, this version 2.0 tool, you'll see like tier 2 is really embedded into the advanced tiers. You'll also see a greater emphasis on classroom and instructional practices embedded into version 2 than was embedded into version 1. Like maybe this means nothing to you, like maybe you didn't even know there was a version 1, that's okay. But one of the things that we were seeing is that we needed to get closer and more explicit about tying the specific reading instructional practices into this tool, because people were building systems, but then still maybe not implementing effective scientifically based reading practices into their daily classroom instruction. And so our long-term goal is to validate this tool and have some predictive validity to student outcomes. And we thought it was really essential to include more practice-oriented items in the assessment in order to do that. But you'll still see systems in there and data. And then another big change we made was to work on to apply some of our learning about better family engagement practices and equity. And so you see that embedded throughout items in the RTFI in their current versions. So I'm going to pause here just a second, and here are 3 examples of some tier 1 items. And so my first question is for you as you scan the item descriptions that you see listed as 1, 2, and 3 there. Which one of those speaks to data? Is it 1, 2, or 3? Yes, 3. And then which one speaks to systems? 2, you've got it. Yes. And number 1 is an example of a practice-based item. Okay, so when we're reading those items, like 1Q is a lot of the practice items really just start with teachers. So like who's responsible for implementing this particular item in the RTFI, really we want to see that it's being done by teachers. Okay, some of the systems items are more, you'll see like a teaming structure referred to, and the data items really talk about different data sources and how data are being used and what questions are being asked when we're looking at data. Okay. So my goal today isn't to do like a deep dive into the RTFI or a deep dive into the RTFI reporting system, because we just don't have enough time for that in 15 minutes, but I want to give you just like enough of an overview. So here's an example of how one of the tier 1 items is set up. And so this is an item that's about the school leadership team using data to monitor the effectiveness of the tier 1 reading components of their MTSS framework. So there's the pattern you'll see is that to get 2 points, there's a lot of stuff that we're asking to be in place, like all of this. And then we have some suggested data sources. This one is kind of vague. Some of them get more specific. And then for 1 point, we're looking about just over half of the 2-point criteria to be in place. And then 0 points is neither of those. And so in this item, I want you to just take a minute and read through and look for places where you see family engagement and equity embedded. What you won't see is that there's like a whole set of items or specific items that speak to equity or to family engagement on their own. Our approach was really to tie into the scoring criteria across many items. And because Smarty shows up all over the place in this particular item, I thought I should spell out that acronym for us. So one of the things I hope you're noticing is that we're calling for Smarty goals. And part of that framework, the E we've added, is that those goals are equity focused. Another thing I hope that you see is when you look at like item 3 or part 3, for example, you should see that we're looking at similarities and differences across groups of how students identify. So we're looking for that disaggregation of data. In part 5, you see that we want to know what parents, families, and caregivers are saying about their kids' skills, progress, and reading supports as a critical data source and a critical question that's being asked. And how those perceptions from students, families, and caregivers may vary across the different groups that people identify with as well. Okay, so just some examples there. That's a really good question, Mary. Yeah, the item itself does, certainly just gives a couple examples, but it's not intended to communicate that like socioeconomic status or other types of variables or language, for example, should be that like excluded from a disaggregated data analysis. It's a good point. It's not exhaustive. Awesome. Okay. So we're kind of transitioning now from talking about the RTFI as an assessment tool to talking about the RTFI reporting system. So when you think about scoring, a measure like this, which is a self-assessment tool that's completed by a leadership team within a school, what's going to be most efficient? So I've got some four options for you here. I'm hoping you'll say a specific number when you think about these different options. I've done all these things. And I think that for you, because we've done all these things, we hope that 3 is your current most efficient process for scoring. But long-term, it could be 4. So Laura, like, I don't mind you saying 4. And then you think about like a district, maybe a district that has like 5 to 10 schools, analyzing their results over time. When you think about what currently is available to folks, probably, well, I'm going to make a case that number 3 is going to be our most efficient option for districts right now as well. Okay. So let's talk a little bit about what the RTFI reporting system does for it. So I'm going to actually go into the system and do a little navigation for you on these areas. So I'm going to show you where we log in, how simple it is to add and edit TFI scores, look at school results, look at district-wide results, see users, and export data. Okay,
and you said this is open source and available?
Yes, yeah.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
You bet. Yeah, we designed.
Yeah,
we designed it for our TA center. So we took a slice of our Michigan data system that's specific to the RTFI, and we just replicated that out in this free access reporting system. So I just was at the login page. I logged in. If I'm working specifically in one district, I just get right to my dashboard. Otherwise,
you need to change your screen share. You're
thanks.
You're welcome.
Yep.
and then maybe dropping a link too. That'd be great. Thanks so much. Or later, as long as the link is easily accessible.
Anita, do you have the copy of my PowerPoint? If you could just drop it right into the chat, that would be amazing. And it has all the hyperlinks in it. Okay, so I'm in a test account right now. Okay, so I've logged in. I want to show you how easy it is. So here's a little history of everything that's been entered for this particular district in the system. To go and add new scores, all I'm doing is I'm clicking add elementary. I'm picking which school it is. I have a couple pre-administration questions, and then I'm just going in. The full rubric is not in the system, so I'm just going through and I'm clicking what my score was for any item. We know teams, like, the best part of doing a fidelity instrument is the discussion that goes with it, right? And part of that discussion often involves like, ooh, we got to note this because that's going to become an action item for us down the road. So people can add notes that are specific to individual items. So it's that simple, putting it in. I'm going to cancel that out. So I can do that for elementary and secondary 2.0. We don't really want people using version 1.0, but historical data stays here if that was being used. And then I can look at school by school results. So if I want to look at historically, I'm a school that's used version 1 over time. I can look at my total score, my tier 1, tier 2, and tier 3 scores over time. And this is all kind of interactive, so I can hide and show different things. And I can also download an items report over time too. So I get my historical scores for individual items and the most recent set of notes that go with that.
Diana, can I just pause you for a second, because I saw Rondalyn's hand up and I'm not sure if
thank you.
It goes back, yeah. Rondalyn, did you have a question that you wanted to ask now?
I can, since I have the mic. I was just curious, do you have districts in your state that try to import this data into the other systems? Have you ever had that request before?
We have. So yes, if you are interested in using the RTFI reporting system and you also have your own state system that you want this to feed into, we have an API process set up where you can automatically set up a procedure to export this data. Then you would build kind of the import function on your end.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Yeah. Yep. And so I can flip to look at 2.0 scores too. This is one of the best parts, I think, is I can look at a district-wide view of my data. So I can, sometimes we want to see patterns across schools and not do that one by one. So on this district-wide results, I can see my district average over time, but I can also look at the individual school patterns over time and kind of get that all displayed in one spot. Users are completely, after we do the initial setup for folks, the users are completely managed by local district staff or maybe regional folks who are supporting the system. But like we kind of have people sign up and then it's kind of in your hands to do what you will with your data. Export options are here, so you can choose whether you're going to what you're going to download. And summary, so just like total scores, or if you want all the item details, you can pick a date range. This can be done at a state level, at a district level, whatever scale. So it's not a complex system. It's there's only one measure that's in here. We hope that it's kind of intuitive to use. But I'm going to go back to my PowerPoint slide deck and just leave you with a few pieces for next step resources for you all. So one thing that I do want to point out, because this system only contains the RTFI data, is that I think with this type of assessment, sometimes people get the notion that this is really a tool that's about compliance. It's about taking the scores. It's about demonstrating that I'm making improvements on the RTFI over time. And what we hope is that if people are using the RTFI, if they're using the RTFI reporting system, that folks like you all are going to help make the connections to the student reading outcomes. So I've got a couple examples here of data stories that you might tell that connect your RTFI data with your student outcome data. So you can go back and look at those. But then this slide includes hyperlinks to the RTFI webpage, which is where you'll go to download the assessments, where you can go to sign up for the RTFI reporting system, where you can log in once you have access. And then there's another hyperlink to a set of EduPass courses to learn more about the RTFI and to become a trained facilitator. All right. And the timing, I'm sorry, it was not exactly really 15 and 15. So my apologies for that.
Anna, thanks for the presentation. It's really helpful. Can you talk a little bit about the scoring in the actual instrument that showed the 0, 1, 2? I'm guessing that's sort of like the not in place, partially in place, in place.
Yeah. So 2 is fully in place, 1 partially in place. The way the scoring rubric works is it's about just over half of the 2-point criteria are required to score 1. And then as 0 is anything less than that.
Yeah, I was going to ask, because I was a little confused between the 0, 1, 2 and the actual data collection tool. But then in the PowerPoint, I think it was slide 8, where you were showing the individual items.
Mm-hmm.
Can you just talk about that a little bit more? It may just be me that I'm slow, but I'm not quite sure how you go from the individual items on a 0, 1, 2, and then it looks like you may be aggregating a collection of items and giving them a 1 or a 0.
Yeah, so like under 2 points, there's lots of criteria to get to that full score of fully in place. And so on an individual item, you have to have all those items, all the sub kind of parts for 2 to get a 2, a little over half of those criteria to get a 1. And then if you don't meet either of those, it's a 0. So there's kind of leaps that people will make, right, to get from a 0 to a 1 or from a 1 to a 2. It's not super incremental for individual item scoring. And then for the total score and the tier scores, it's just like the total points earned divided by the total points possible.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Brent, because I administer this fidelity tool in Michigan, it's really nice because it's one of those tools where if you have a team read through it, you can say, okay, for this item, all means all. Where are we at? Right? And let's, circle the things that you guys are firmly in place and we have evidence around. And if we don't have all, then do we have at least half? And then we can have conversations about from there, the scores kind of locked in based on what the criteria is. And then they can have like those easier next questions instead of quibbling between, is it a 2 or is it a 1 or that sort of thing? Then they can start putting some meaningful, we use sticky notes in ours of like, okay, what do you want to put on the parking lot for action planning later? What's the thing that you want to work on from this item that we're going to come back to later? So I've worked with both of the versions of it, and this one is just from the administration aspect of it. It just is a lot cleaner when you're working with a team.
No, and that's interesting. The next session I want to go to, it's something about using teams to assess fidelity.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. What other questions or ideas are there in the last minute?
And real quick, I'll speak. I'm the evaluator for the Georgia SPDIG, and there's 2 other folks, Rhonda and Laura, from Georgia. And we're looking at this. They're a new grantee as well, just like you all, yeah. And looking at this tool. So it's very likely we'll be back with a question.
That's awesome. Yes, you can reach out to me, or Kim St. Martin is the lead author on the tool. She would be wonderful. I know she has done a lot of work with Washington State and Ohio as they've worked on integrating this tool into their SPDIGs as well.
Great, thanks.
Mm-hmm. Glad to have you here.
Any last questions for Anna? I'm sure, like she just said to Brent, she's open for follow-ups at any time. I think it's a real nice opportunity that, even though you're a new grant right now, you've been in a 4th iteration, and so able to share this knowledge and something concrete from us all, right? The next session is in 15 minutes. It's another 15 plus 15. So I'm sorry, it's not in 15 minutes, it's in 5 minutes. So you have less than 5 minutes. There are some people that may be over it. This particular room, there's another session, or you can jump over to another session. So I'm just going to put the link back in the chat so you can stay in this room for the other session, or you can go to a different one.